Hi, this video is about the bike that I did my South Downs double on. I did the ride a couple of years ago, and afterwards I made some notes about what worked really well and what didn't work so well, so that I would have those ideas fresh in my mind when I came to do the ride again. The bike that I rode the South Downs double on was a Scott Scale 910, and there are a couple of things I would change on that frame. It's the low mod Scott scale frame, and Scott's at the time used a wide diameter seat post, which meant that you could feel everything going on under the saddle. So I would look for a bike with a 27.2mm seat post and a little bit of more compliance built into the frame. So the bikes I'm looking at are things like the Highball 3 by Santa Cruz and the Pro Caliber and BMC bikes, which have compliance designed specifically into the frame. In terms of the fork, I had sore hands for most of the ride, so I was thinking about the fork quite a lot. The fork was good. The fork was a Scott. The fork was a Fox 32 without the Kashima. It's a factory fork, but without the Kashima, and with a lockout. The fork was serviced just before I did the ride, and that made a really big difference. I'd recommend anyone to do that because it really improved the performance of the fork. However, the remote I would not bother with because although I can see how that's great for sprinting if you're doing cross-country riding, for long rides I was just always forgetting to unlock it after locking out a climb, and that was just hurting my hands, so I just kept it unlocked for the whole ride. One design that I think would actually work really well would be something like the brain technology on Specialized RockShox forks, because then it knows whether you're going uphill or downhill, or it knows whether you need suspension or not. And the other fork that I think would work quite well would be something like the Lauf Leaf fork, because the bumps that you're hitting on the South Downs Way really aren't that big. One final thing about the fork is that they got covered in dust, and I was thinking that cannot be the most efficient design. So forks like the Lefty, I remember at the time thinking a Lefty would be the thing to have for this, and the other thing would be something like a RS1 fork, because again I think the sanction's just out of the way of the wheels, and therefore attract a little bit less dust. When you're doing a marathon ride like the South Downs double, my bike was super heavy because I had inner tubes down here, I had a big frame bag here, I had of course my water bottle, and my other water bottle was full of gels, and then I had another 10 gels stuck along the top. So the bike was super heavy, so I was self-supported, and I was carrying tools and everything on top of that. So the bike was a lot heavier, and that meant that there was a lot more pressure on the wheels. Now, Stan's crests that I was using are great if you're a light cross-country type rider. However, if you're a slightly heavier rider and you're adding a few kilos to the weight of the bike, then they were just a little bit too flexible, and actually the front wheels started wobbling about 100 miles into it. So I would use carbon wheels next time. In terms of the width of the rims, there's a fashion at the moment for going super wide. I'm not 100% sure about that because I'm not a great bike handler, and I would worry about cutting sidewalls, so I need to think about that, maybe going slightly wider, but not the sort of full 30 mils, which are the fashion at the moment. In terms of tyres, I used Racing Ralph Snakeskin 2.25 at the front, and I used a Continental 2.2 Protection at the back. The Protection tyre actually punctured about halfway through the ride, and but it did seal, and it actually rolled a lot better after it had punctured. So if I do the ride again, I will make some detailed notes about PSI, what works and what doesn't, so I can get the pressure absolutely right. And but I would probably use those tires again. Gears, I used a double chain set at the front and a front mech, of course, and that is terribly unfashionable at the moment, but it really did work. Rory Hitchens, who knows a lot about the South Downs double, says the granny gear is your friend, and I think that's great advice. And when your bike is so heavily weighed down, I mentioned that earlier, you need a lower gear than usual. And when I set up my bike with everything on, and I went for a test ride, I couldn't believe what low gearing I was having to use to get up really low, really quite shallow slopes. So I would use a double again, and the new Shimano gearing with 11 at the back and the new front mech should be really good. So that's what I'll go for. I'll go for XT 2 times at the front, 2 times 11. The brakes I used were the Shimano XT, and the reason I really like those is that the pads are quite a long way away from the rotor, and that means that they're really easy to set up and you don't get any brake rubbing. However, one thing I probably got wrong is the rotor. I used the Ashima rotors, which are super lightweight, but they, because I keep mentioning this, because the bike is so heavy, I think I was putting more pressure on the brakes, and of course you're riding tired and you're riding in the dark, and I remember the brakes really, the rotors really overheating and probably warping a little bit and rubbing the pads. So I would just use regular Shimano rotors if I was doing it again. My personal bit of advice for anyone doing marathon riding or South Downs Double, of course, is to get the touch points right. The grips, the saddle, and the handlebars. In terms of the handlebars, I found it really difficult to get on with the flat bars that came with the bike, and I tried carbon bars, that didn't make any difference, and I think that was because they were flat and I was used to risers, and because of the sweep. They were bikes, most bars come with a 9-degree sweep, whereas I was much happier with the 7-degree sweep on these Ventfuls, so I've got on quite well with them. And in terms of the grips, I used dial gauge to measure the different diameters of different grips. I tried everything from the super narrow ones to the really fat ones, and the ones that I settled on were the Odi Attacks, which is a great design. But I find it amazing that the grip companies, a lot of the grip companies, don't give the diameter of their grips. I think Hope do, I think Renthal do, but Odi don't, and Odi is the biggest brand. So I had to use a dial gauge, as I said, to get the diameter just right, and kind of wrote all those down and recorded what was working or what wasn't working. And I think that's the level of detail you have to go into for something as important as grips. With saddle, again, that was kind of trial and error, but saddles and grips are so easy to swap over. That would be my advice for anyone doing a ride like this, to experiment with every different grip and every different saddle that you can get your hands on, just to find out what works well and what doesn't. So that is the review of my bike that I did the double on a couple of years ago. I'm ready for another bike right now, and I'm looking around, and I'm trying to find the right setup for the South Downs, and using this information to choose the right design. When that bike is built and set up, I will let you know how it looks and review it. Thanks a lot.